When guards turned against the system, subscribe for more real crime stories. Like, share, and join the discussion below. The sound of steel bars echoed through the narrow hallway as investigators moved deeper into the New York State Prison. It was April 2015, and the place smelled of sweat, metal, and fear. One officer pushed open the door to a cell and froze. The bunks were empty. Sheets had been cut neatly. The pipes above had been pried open. The unthinkable had happened. 2 convicted murderers had escaped from a maximum security prison. The alarms blared seconds later. Guards shouted orders, boots pounded across the concrete floor, and spotlights swept across the yard. For a moment, everyone thought it was impossible. No one had ever broken out of Clinton Correctional Facility, not like this. Yet the impossible had just happened. When investigators looked closer, they saw the escape route. Hidden behind a metal wall was a perfectly cut hole leading into the prison's underground tunnels. It was a maze of pipes and darkness. The fugitives, Richard Matt and David Sweat, had crawled through it for hundreds of feet before emerging through a manhole outside the prison walls. But what shocked the investigators most wasn't the escape itself. It was how these men pulled it off. They had help, not from other inmates, but from someone who wore the same uniform as those chasing them. A guard. Within hours, suspicion turned toward a prison worker named Joyce Mitchell. She was a civilian supervisor in the prison tailor shop, friendly, soft-spoken, and she had worked closely with both escapees. The question was, could someone like her really have helped 2 killers walk free? As investigators questioned staff, cracks began to appear in the story. Some guards spoke of strange behavior, late-night favors, secret deliveries. One officer even claimed to have seen Matt and Sweat getting extra privileges, while Mitchell often smiled in their direction. Outside the prison, the search grew massive. Hundreds of officers and state troopers combed through the woods of upstate New York. Helicopters hovered above. Roadblocks went up for miles. The media called it the most daring prison escape in modern history. Inside the prison, fear spread among the staff. If the escapees had help from the inside, who else was involved? And how deep did the betrayal go? Then a new piece of evidence changed everything. A hacksaw blade, the same kind used to cut through metal pipes, was found hidden inside frozen hamburger meat inside the prison kitchen. It was meant for the escapees. Someone had smuggled it in. Investigators followed the trail straight back to Joyce Mitchell. But when they sat her down in an interrogation room, she smiled nervously and said, "I didn't mean for anyone to get hurt." The officer leaned forward. "Then tell us," he said quietly. "How did you help them escape?" The room went silent, and then she began to talk. Joyce Mitchell sat in the small interrogation room, her hands trembling as she picked at a tissue. The walls felt like they were closing in. Cameras rolled. Detectives waited. Finally, she broke her silence. "They told me they loved me," she whispered. "They said they wanted a new life, and I believed them." Detectives exchanged glances. Her voice was shaking, but every word pulled them deeper into the story. Joyce Mitchell, a 51-year-old prison worker, had fallen into an emotional and possibly romantic relationship with both inmates, Richard Matt and David Sweat. The 2 men, both convicted killers, had spent months manipulating her, using charm, attention, and false promises to win her trust. At first, it was small favors, extra fabric, private conversations in the tailor shop. But then, it turned darker. Mitchell began smuggling tools into the prison. Hacksaw blades, chisels, and screwdrivers, all hidden inside packages of frozen hamburger meat. Each item carefully passed to the inmates, piece by piece, until their escape plan was fully armed. She claimed they told her she would run away with them once they got out. They even planned to kill her husband, who also worked at the prison, so she could start a new life with them. The plan, she said, terrified her. But by then, it was too late to back out. Detectives pressed for more. How did they cut through the pipes? Who gave them access? Joyce told them the truth. She provided the tools, the information, even the timing of the guards' patrols. "I thought I was helping them find freedom," she said, "but I didn't know I was helping monsters." Outside the interrogation room, investigators pieced together the incredible scope of the operation. The escape had taken months of preparation. Every movement in the prison had been calculated, every sound masked by the daily noise of the facility. Meanwhile, the manhunt was exploding across the state. Over 1,000 law enforcement officers scoured the forests and small towns near the Canadian border. Locals were told to lock their doors. News stations broadcast every update live. Schools closed. The state governor even called it a crisis like no other. But as the search dragged on, something became clear. Matt and Sweat weren't just hiding. They were surviving. They had stolen food, tents, even weapons from cabins in the area. They knew the woods better than the police expected. Inside the prison, tension reached its breaking point. Guards whispered about who else might have been involved. Some pointed fingers at one of their own, a corrections officer named Gene Palmer. He had worked in the same unit as the escapees and had been known to do favors for inmates. When investigators questioned him, he tried to stay calm. "I didn't know they were planning an escape," he said. But his story didn't hold for long. A search of his home revealed paint cans, tools, and contraband tied directly to the escape. The truth was closing in, but the fugitives were still out there. The longer they stayed free, the more dangerous the situation became. And then, on a quiet morning 2 weeks after the escape, a gunshot echoed through the dense woods of upstate New York. A police officer had spotted something moving through the trees, and the chase was about to turn deadly. The forest was silent except for the rustle of leaves and the crackle of police radios. Officers moved cautiously, rifles raised, scanning every shadow. It had been more than 2 weeks since Richard Matt and David Sweat vanished from Clinton Correctional Facility, and now, the hunt had reached its breaking point. In the early morning light, a state trooper spotted movement in a thick patch of trees near Malone, New York. He shouted a warning. A single gunshot echoed, sharp, final, and chilling. When the officers closed in, they found Richard Matt lying on the ground. He had been hit once in the head. Next to him were a shotgun, a pair of binoculars, and a bottle of whiskey. The news spread fast. After 22 days of fear, one fugitive was down. But David Sweat was still out there, and officers knew he wouldn't go quietly. Helicopters circled overhead. Checkpoints were set up across miles of road. Every cabin, every barn, every shadow in the trees was searched. 2 days later, near the small town of Constable, a trooper driving down a rural road saw something strange. A man jogging toward the woods, wearing camouflage and carrying a large duffel bag. The trooper shouted, "Stop! State police!" Sweat didn't stop. He ran. The chase tore through the fields. Sweat was fast, desperate, and terrified. The trooper fired 2 warning shots, but when Sweat kept running toward the tree line, just steps from the Canadian border, the officer fired again. Sweat collapsed to the ground. He was hit twice but alive. When they handcuffed him, officers said he looked both exhausted and relieved. He had lost more than 30 pounds during his time on the run. His first words to investigators were hauntingly simple: "I couldn't run anymore." With Sweat's capture, the longest and most expensive manhunt in New York history finally ended. Over $23 million had been spent, and entire towns had been shut down in fear. The public demanded answers. How could 2 convicted murderers escape from a maximum security prison with help from the inside? In the following months, the truth unraveled. Joyce Mitchell pleaded guilty to helping the inmates and was sentenced to up to 7 years in prison. Officer Gene Palmer admitted to smuggling contraband but insisted he never knew about the escape plan. He received a lighter sentence. The state launched a full investigation, uncovering serious failures in oversight, training, and guard supervision. For many Americans, the Clinton correctional escape became a symbol of how power and trust can break down from within. It wasn't just a story about 2 men breaking out of prison. It was about how manipulation, loneliness, and corruption turned ordinary workers into accomplices. Even after the prison walls were repaired and life returned to normal, the scars remained. The story haunted the town, the officers, and the families of those involved. People whispered about how close the fugitives came to disappearing forever, and how, if not for one careful trooper, the ending might have been very different. In the end, it wasn't just the system that was tested, it was everyone inside it. Guards, investigators, even the small communities surrounding the prison. When those who wear the uniform cross the line, the system itself begins to crumble. And though the manhunt ended, one question still lingered in the quiet corners of Dannemora. What happens the next time the guards stop guarding and start helping the escape?